My name is Ziad Alexander Hayek. I'm the president of the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals, otherwise known as WAP, as most of you know. And it gives me a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you on this fifth session in our enlightening series on small-scale public-private partnerships. As we continue with our bi-weekly meetings in 2024, our dedication to understanding and promoting small-scale PPPs as a vehicle for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals grows even stronger. Indeed, we have now formally, when we started this program, we started it as WAP alone. UNECE was considering to join as a partner, and I'm delighted that since in the past few weeks, UNECE has formally approved their joining as partners. So this program is from now on going to be known as the UNECE WAP small-scale PPP program. Many thanks to Tony Bonici, who heads the PPP program at the UNECE, and to Sayed Zaidi, who is leading the PPP Bureau at UNECE, and to all the members of the PPP Bureau at UNECE. We embarked on this journey by establishing a foundational understanding of small-scale PPPs in our first session. In our second meeting, we delved into myriad challenges that these initiatives often face. Our third session was an engaging exploration of potential solutions to these challenges. Building on this progression, in our previous session, we engaged in a thorough examination of what strategies have been tried, highlighting both their successes and the lessons learned from their failures. Today, we are poised to take on a significant step forward as we focus on the essential regulatory framework elements needed to foster a conducive environment for small-scale PPPs. I'm delighted to introduce David Dodd, who will expertly navigate us through today's discussions. David Dodd is an international thought leader in sustainable economic development, disaster recovery, public-private partnerships, and climate adaptation. He has worked for 47 years and on 4 continents. He served as Dean of the University of Oklahoma Economic Development Institute and is a founding CEO of the International Sustainable Resilience Center. He is one of the co-founders of WAP and serves as its treasurer. David, I give you the floor to introduce the participants and moderate this session. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Ziad, and welcome everyone to this session. That's a seminal session. Policy and laws are often complex and difficult to navigate, but we have a panel here that is prepared to jump into that and dive very deep. I am notorious for butchering names. I have a Southern U.S. accent, which makes it very difficult to say certain names. And so I have asked the guests to please introduce themselves, just a brief introduction. And I'm going to start with you, Christine, and please introduce yourself. And then I think I had chosen the order. If you can't remember the order, we will go name by name. But go ahead, Christine.
Thanks, David, and good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Disa. I come from the infrastructure services team at water.org, which is an international nonprofit that's really pioneered market-driven solutions to solve the global water crisis. And I work very closely with our sister organization, which is Water Equity, that is an impact fund solely focused on water and sanitation, and is also looking to now mobilize investments into the water and sanitation infrastructure space. And what we're really looking at is how can we, from the advocacy front, how can we improve and advocate for a better enabling environment to channel greater private finance and greater private sector participation in the development of climate resilient water and sanitation infrastructure. Really happy to be here. And yeah, back to you, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Amdeep, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Myself, I'm Amdeep Singh Birk. I've been working in PPPs more than 24 years. right from the upstream work, right, helping countries to develop PPP laws, regulations, policy, and guidelines, to right up to the transactions and financing the projects. So I've been working across sectors, both large-scale projects and small-scale projects, and looking forward to this important and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Stephen?
Thank you, David. My name is Steven Magarse. I'm the former head of the Flemish-Belgian government PPP Center in charge of the PPP policy and projects. Currently, I have a double life. I'm an academic at the University of Hasselt and Antwerp, and I'm a lawyer at the Brussels bar. I in charge of the Center for Government and Law, and I authored many articles and books on PPPs, concessions, public procurements, and general administrative law.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Felix?
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Felix Aruangdum. I'm currently the Director General for Plateau State Infrastructure Promotion and Regulatory Agency. Plateau State is a subnational in Nigeria, one of the 36 states as a federating unit. I also sit as a chairman of Partnership and Resource Mobilization of the Africa PPP Network. I'm also pretty much responsible for, within Plateau State, development of all PPP project pipelines and guiding the administration towards, executing PPP projects in relation with other subnationals across Nigeria and Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Joyty?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jyoti Bisbee. I'm one of the executive committee members of WAP, based in Washington, D.C. I've been involved in PPPs for more than 20 years, been working in the World Bank and at UN, and really excited to be here discussing the legal and regulatory framework of small-scale PPPs, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Joyty. And last but certainly not least, Mark?
Hello, everybody. I'm most happy to be here. Myself, I'm a very old lawyer, having been dealing with those matters for a long time. I don't need to tell you for how long, just to say that I started with the Channel Tunnel, my first concession. And from there, I had the opportunity to work around the world on the most on important infrastructure, public infrastructure project, out of which we try to see to which extent it could be developed better sometimes under PPP, kind of PPP forms. After a long career, then I worked quite a lot with helping the IFIs to develop their own best practices in the matter, and eventually with the UNICE, where I had the chance to be the General Secretary of the Center of Excellence, Special Center of Excellence on Policies, Law and Institution, and last but not least, at the level of WAP, I am most happy to be the chair of the legislative framework chapter.
Thank you, Mark, so much. I'm going to just randomly choose one of you, so be prepared. As we know, the absolute crying need for public-private partnerships worldwide continues to grow. And we know a lot about large public-private partnerships, those in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars that can afford the fairly high fixed cost of developing a PPP. So my first question is from your vantage point, and I'll start with you, Felix. From your vantage point, where do you see policies that could help enable small-scale PPPs that may be now not feasible because of certain policies and laws that may escalate those costs, those fixed costs? How do you see that potentially being changed through changes in law and policy?
Thank you, David. Yeah, so as I sit as a, from where I sit as a public servant, right? And luckily for us, I must commend WAP and this initiative for, championing this discussion on small-scale PPPs, because as we're trying to scale down, not just looking at PPPs from a national level, but really looking at it where it meets closer to the people, and trying to also integrate, as we said, sustainability development goals, as well as people first type of PPPs. It's very instrumental for organizations like ours, where we've had to struggle with the conflict of the existing laws and frameworks that have been established historically regarding PPPs, the structures for which these laws in the past have been defined in terms of more skewed towards really huge infrastructure developments. And obviously for subnationals and local level players, that becomes a huge conflict, right? Because the law has been set in place, and you're trying to adapt apples and oranges pretty much, because the reality of the economic climate and the structures of subnationals and local level communities are completely skewed in being able to really discuss and implement PPPs. And we see, I think, at the general level, that's why, especially speaking across the similar discussions we're having across Africa, the lack of progress regarding executing PPPs as the definition of PPPs generally have been given out, right? So this category or segment that is now being looked at specifically as small-scale PPPs kind of also gives that enablement to be able to cluster and revisit that foundation of what exactly is PPPs, and in terms of adapting it to the local needs, because for us, from a subnational level against the national levels, rather than just obviously needing hard infrastructure, the interest is also for economic drivers and matrices that would have direct impact on the people, and of course aligning it to also the resources and the compelling advantages that we have that are closer to our own environment. And every environment in different climes, especially across Africa, is unique, with their own natural resources, with their own assets and all those kind of things. So that alignment of the policies, regulations, as we describe PPPs, need to be met with our local climes for it to be more effective. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Felix. By the way, those of you in attendance, please feel free to put any questions you have as the discussion progresses into the Q&A. That way we will take time to address your questions before the end of the session. So who else wants to chime in here?
I think, if I may, David, I think another sort of important requirement, because I think we all agree here, and I'm sure this has been discussed in previous talks in the series, that most national PPP laws are really written for those large-scale projects, usually these mega projects, and it's not really very applicable. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense for small-scale PPPs to follow the same processes. But what's interesting to see is that a lot of countries have begun to recognize this. And we see examples of where countries have begun to amend their PPP legislation to actually distinguish between national projects and local projects. And even within national projects, there are usually threshold limits that are used to define, what kind of approvals a larger scale project requires versus a smaller one. We see that happening. I think recently Philippines introduced its new PPP code, I think in December of 2023. And very interesting to see there that the local governments have been given much greater authority to approve local level projects. And even for national projects, a lot of authority to approve these projects, to appraise these projects, has been devolved to the implementing agency rather than it going to some central government authority, and then it gets stuck there forever. So I think these are interesting developments that we're seeing, in our part of the world.
Excellent. Who's next?
Yeah, David, if I may. So, I agree with Christine and Felix both, but, to start with, in the countries and in the PPP fraternity, we need to create an importance of small scale projects. Every country who starts with PPP, they want to do large scale projects, highways, metros, etc., etc. So through regulatory framework, we need to create an importance of the small scale project, because it is these projects which creates grassroots benefits, right? Grassroots benefit either through a small education project, health project, tourism, conservation. So it's at grassroots level, which gives a better economic and social benefits. And that's where the regulatory framework comes into play. We need to start. Agree, few countries have started preparing guidelines, not laws. There's a difference between law and the guideline. They started preparing guidelines for local government. Now, again, another caution. Small scale projects are not only under local governments. They are under other subnational jurisdictions like state governments. There are many small scale projects under not at the national level, but at the state level, and then the local level. So one mistake, I would say not a mistake, but the correction can be the guidelines are being prepared for local government. It should be rather for the small scale as such, which creates one example. Recently, Tanzania has done amendments in its regulation, PPP regulation, which have a clause or section on specifically small scale, which covers both local government and other small scale projects, which comes under some jurisdiction or such. I will stop here. We will continue discussion. So that's where the starting point is. Create importance. Political bosses need to understand the importance of small scale, right? And it is a benefit of political bosses also, because the vote bank is at the grassroots. Thank you.
Great comment. Great comment. Who's next? Mark?
Yeah. Well, thanks. I think it's important to see what happened around the world. In fact, when we did our work at the level of the UNICE Center of Excellence in order to prepare and to help draft the regulations, what we did was a very large analysis of the type of PPP which existed at the time around the world. And within that, we noticed, and it was not a surprise for me, of course, but we noticed that small-scale PPP have been extremely well developed in some kind of countries, in some region, and not in others. And more specifically, in civil law countries, even more specifically in civil law Napoleonic countries. And the question is why? Why there are so many small-scale PPP for so many years at a very local level, which appear to be functioning well? So then, in order to get the answer, what we find is that there is altogether an enabling framework. I'm not saying a legal framework, an enabling framework. And this framework, how this framework has been developed, not by law, not by regulation, but from case law. It developed from case law because there was in those countries a specific court ruling in equity in the relationship between the public and the private sector. And then at the local level, these cases with a lot of authority were driving the way the party would start developing projects. And then what happened later? This case law then was transformed progressively in standards, in policies, in bidding documents. What is missing the most is a standard bidding document for PPP, where at the same time they do exist everywhere for traditional procurement. And all those progressively aggregated. And as a result, now there is clearly a path for putting in a regulatory framework what is necessary to develop them. In some countries you have them, in others you don't. And this is what we have been trying to do in the UNICE framework law on People First PPP, which make the synthesis of all this. So clearly, now we are very close to the next level PPP with all the aggregate information which has been transformed and used locally in many countries and which now is embedded into the framework law. So I think we are very much on a good path to continue.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Georgie and Stephen, what about you?
I can go next. So I think many good points already made, and I don't want to repeat them. I think the thing which I want to bring to the table is I think the countries are very different, and I see on the chat there's so many different country representation here, and every country is at a very different stage of their PPP program development. And to me, as the countries mature to the first generation of PPPs, the second generation, the third generation, I think it kind of progressively, that capacity, that recognition, and that visibility kind of trickles down from the national level to those large scale projects for which the original PPP program was set up and the legal structure was made up. So it also has to do with the development of the PPP program and how far the country has really taken its recognition of PPP as a development tool, and then recognize that contracting authorities can actually exist beyond the national ministries and sectoral agencies, and recognition that the national PPP framework can actually needs to be, can work and possibly needs to be customized further. So I think this nuance which we see all over the globe, and it doesn't matter whether it's advanced country or developing country, because a lot of the advanced countries don't have extensive PPP program, and obviously at municipal level they are not really looking at private sector as a partner to the public sector investment, and I think that distinguishing factor has to be made. So overall, I think I think today globally we are at a point where we are able to have this discussion today more because many countries are in the second or the third generation of PPP program development.
Excellent. Stephen, what about you?
Yeah. Let me elaborate on that. I think it's true. We now have a general framework, general legislation that can be used. But if you look at the small scale PPPs, what we do need is specific policy, specific guidelines. And what I experienced in Belgium is that if you look at it from a sectoral perspective, it works quite well. And if you look for example, schools, sport infrastructure, and then you make specific policy documentation, not necessarily specific legislation, but policy is very good as a starter, and then you could move on. And of course, each country is different, but still within a country, within a region, it's possible to do some standardization. And I think that is also very important in those small-scale PPPs, to standardize as much as possible without, I don't say we need to standardize and put it in legislation. It has to remain flexible, but I think standardization in combination with flexibility and a sector-specific approach works quite well.
Excellent. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, I jump on what Stephen says. I think it's important to understand that well-prepared project is more or less to be developed in the same manner, whether it is developed countries or developing countries. And it is something which has been agreed nowadays, agreed between the IFIs, the industry, and others. So I think it's important not to put too much importance on a country or a sector. Still, you have, the G20 call that the gold standards, which are there, how you well prepare step by step a project. And then when you do that, very quickly, you arrive, and I follow Stephen, you arrive to standardization, you arrive to standard contract. We head of terms of contract. Why the head of term of contract in a particular city which need water, when you know that you have 1,000 cities which need water in the same country, why the head of term should be different within that country? And then you go one step further. Why the head of terms should be different in the country next to here, where you also need to have 1,000 projects in water. So it's very important not to put too much importance on the sector specific or country specific. You can very well arrive with core principles applied. And that is exactly what has been done, trying to be done in the Unity framework clause to extract what was common and valid virtually everywhere. And then you arrive to small scale. So then in a small scale, if I go in my neighbor city, the mayor tell me, hey guy, I need to do PPP. Now, how do we? And then I look at that, I have a guide. So I think we should quite easily extend to this to everyone to improve the development.
If I may comment, Mark, regarding that. So I hear you, and that's been the structure that has been existent, right? In terms of looking at trying to adapt a certain framework to so many different complexities that are uniquely diverse and completely different. So from the African context, and like we said, the existing frameworks are already there. And in the efforts have also been made to try and adapt these frameworks to the realities on ground. And what we've seen statistically is that obviously those challenges are there and they're very glaring in terms of not meeting the needs for the local economies, especially when we're talking at the subnational to the local levels, because uniquely these existing frameworks or trying to adapt, let's put it like that, whether developing or developed frameworks to developing or communities like ours would really be pretty much on non-existence, because part of what we're also looking at, let's say as a subnational right now, in reviewing our regulations, because even with the national regulations that have kind of demonstrated some success in terms of very hard, PPP infrastructures, trying to adapt those regulations locally at the subnational level, we've had to review our laws in that sense. Luckily, because we also operate like a federal system, so the states are quite autonomous in terms of being able to run their own PPP programs. But even trying to cascade it to the local government levels is still a bit of a challenge due to capacity. So the states kind of control the local governments. But I think the principles to which govern PPP, right, it should be some of the key areas of focus for people like, for especially climates like within Africa, that each jurisdiction, each economy, local economy, and each political focus in that sense, in terms of development agenda, would be definitely quite diverse or unique, right? And then trying to align each and every framework, towards the same process. Because part of, as you mentioned, the project preparation phase, which is quite most important, the complexity of it when we talk about smaller scale PPP, right? And what we do define as small scale PPP, because we should look what might be small scale in Europe, definitely might not be small scale here in Africa, right? So that now becomes a conflict for us in terms of really adjusting to what the local climate is. And then from my own interpretation of what small scale PPP should be looking at would be the context of it should be fully localized in terms of financing, in terms of capacity development, in terms of, just that holistic integration. And with that, you would see that the requirement for project preparation might be less complex, right? The risk profiling that needs to also go into, determining what kind of framework for delivering such projects, because as subnationals also, we have, historically, they're asset heavy, let's put it like that, right? Where government used to own a lot of assets. And over time, due to fiscal constraints and all that, there's been neglect of some of these assets, right? So we would want to look at small PPPs as some of these, where some of these assets can be possible concession.
Well, Felix, you bring up a great point, because my field is disaster resilience, and there's a dire need to upgrade existing infrastructure. Often that falls within the scope of small scale. And then that leads to the next question. You teed this up for me perfectly. So when we're talking about small scale PPPs at the local or subnational level, how can policy, especially policy, but policy and laws together, ensure that the principles of next generation PPPs, people first PPPs, diversity, equity, transparency, inclusion, lack of corruption, how can we ensure through policy and law that is adhered to at the local level? Because there's somewhat of a loss of control, at least from the federal standpoint, the national standpoint. These guys are doing this at the local level. How can we ensure that they are embedding the principles of next generation? And I'm going to pick on Jyoti because Jyoti's passionate about this, into those PPPs.
Thank you, David. I think there are very interesting points coming out here. Every country is different. Like I was saying, there are countries which have empowered, and I think in case of, like Felix is saying, Nigeria has empowered the states to actually serve as contracting authorities. And I think that needs to be really understood. Many countries do not have the ability of local authorities to actually sign the contract. And if everything is managed at the national level, even these small projects in a PPP, we are not talking about these service contracts or construction contracts. We're talking about a PPP contract with adherence to the PPP laws of that particular country. The local authorities they need to be empowered to serve as contracting authorities. And when they sign that contract, they need to ensure all the fiduciary responsibilities which have been written in the contract, all the project management responsibilities which have been written in the contract, and all the results focused responsibilities and impact management which they have signed on as part of the contract. So the responsibility of the government doesn't really, they cannot just step back and say, okay, I have given this contract to the private sector and say that I can wash my hands off. And since it's the national government who's defining, and again, the law may be at the national level, but the contracting authority is still sitting at the local level of the municipality or the state, and they have to really understand what they are signing on, and they have to understand the responsibilities for the duration of the contract. The contract may be 10 years, maybe 15 years and 20 years, and that information flow has to flow up and it has to flow down, and down is to the stakeholders and to the beneficiaries of that particular project. And I think one of the comment is on this particular aspect in terms of transparency and disclosure, and especially the KP as a unitary cost of that contract affects the beneficiaries at the local community level who don't have any idea where PPPs are, and the information has to flow up because it has to really impact the fiduciary responsibilities of the national PPP units and possibly the public finance management of the projects, depending on the size of the project. So definitely, I think it's very essential, the contracting authority power and the responsibility of the local authority really has to be at the forefront.
Excellent, thank you, Georgie. And by the way, if you haven't looked at in the chat, there are some excellent comments being entered into the chat. And we will make those available as well. So I think, who was next? I think Deep, I think you said something. So go ahead.
All right, thanks, David. To your question on how to the policies or the laws, the small scale or local level transparency and fairness can be ensured. The answer to that is yes, to create a separate regulatory framework for small scale and local government with answer, two-level answer: institutional mechanism and disclosure framework. Okay, that helps in transparency and fairness. So in institutional mechanism, you have a national PPP unit or center, and then you have a local government. You need to create a PPP node, whatever the nomenclature we have, and then the hierarchy helping PPP send national level, helping the local government, and then they are overseeing also. Then the creation of another level of process, institutional mechanism called process auditing. Process auditing. So every phase of the PPP, we know the first, as earlier, Mark said, PPP project has to be a good project, first of all, right? That's the first process of any PPP. So whether it's, some countries do have a public investment management framework, it comes through. If it is not, then the national PPP watchdog has to see it's a good project. Next level, project preparation, right? So whether it's process is being done well, transaction, everything. So process auditing is the answer, could be the answer to look at the transparency. Second is the disclosure framework. Most of the developing nations, even the national PPP units of developing nations, they are afraid of disclosing the information. Always, so we at the World Bank, we always try to push them, okay, disclose it. It will help you. It will get you value for money. But they always, so it's a kind of type of creating awareness. So answer is institutional mechanism and disclosure framework will help transparency, fairness, and attractiveness of the private sector market to the small scale and local government. Thank you.
Who's next?
I just wanted to bring a slightly different perspective to how do we, to transparency and fairness. And I think just linking to what Jyoti said, how do we enshrine certain protections, whether it's in terms of sustainability, social protections. I think in cultures where, it's fairly decentralized powers that rest with local governments, I think local elected representatives, the general bodies, can, and they do in some cities, at least we've seen in India, they do pass resolutions. Okay, I mean, policy is a big word, but at the local level, this is a policy. They can pass resolutions that, that mandate certain requirements, whether it means, whether it's about tariffs, inclusion, certain environmental outcomes, and then whatever micro level PPPs that are happening at that city level, they need to comply with those resolutions. So I think that's another way in which, these kind of protections can be embedded at a very micro scale. And secondly, I think when we talk about transparency, I think what we also need to understand is that very often local governments are terrified of the kind of contracts, that they need to sign for these PPP projects, these huge 100-page verbose documents that they simply cannot comprehend. And I think we talk a lot about standardization, but I think what we also really need, and again, for these small micro PPPs, we need simpler contracts. We would constantly face this problem when we were working with local bodies. They were like, can't you just give us a 10-page contract for this project? Do we need to spell out everything? Aren't certain things understood? Or, so, I think that's also important, to have this option, to have simpler contracts, so that, local governments have the confidence really to execute these projects, to sign these contracts.
Anyone else?
Yeah, let me build on that. I think it's important if local governments set up PPP contracts or PPP projects, that they collaborate with the national or the regional PPP units, because they have the expertise. And so they have the expertise. For the local projects, it's once in a lifetime. But for the regional, they do that on a daily basis. So that's one element. And then I want to add another dimension, if I can, because if you make a contract or a project at local level, you need to attract the financing and the funding, and that can become an issue. And so in many cases, you will need the regional or national level. For example, you need a sub-sovereign guarantee. So there needs to be a collaboration between all levels involved, and there need to be some institutional arrangement, be it that the process can be standardized, but to some extent, You need the capacity, you need those arrangements, otherwise it will not work.
Stephen, I've moderated a lot of sessions before. Not one. I'll get to you, Mark. Not one that the panelists all give me the questions that I was going to ask. So we're going to get back to that. But Mark, go ahead.
Well, thanks. I think it was important that Jyoti remembered that we are speaking of a contract, and that the question is how and why a local government is considering entering into a PPP contract. Why do they change from their traditional way of dealing, finding the money, developing the specification, etc.? Why? Yeah, you certain, but among them, because the local government precisely are not sure that they will develop the best possible projects in terms of optimized public service. So then they ask to the community of the private sector, they ask them, please come with that first. And then when looking at that, the second point, you come, but then you must justify that you finance. So for me, it's better for my budget. I don't have the money. And three, you have to justify that all the way around for the life cycle, it will be better for me. So then local government, when you start with those principles in mind, it's quite simple to launch a project. You don't need to do like normal project. You don't need to develop technical specification. You say, this is what I want. Do you, private sector, are you able to do it better than myself? Those are the functional specifications. Those are the KPIs. So I might, at my level, it's much simpler to start by looking at PPP when I have no money, when I'm not sure, than to do a normal project. So the next step, of course, is is that done out of the blue? And the answer for us, when you look at the experience all over the world, for sure not. For sure not. You have to abide by all the core principles of your country in terms of transparency, in terms of equity, in terms of public service, in terms of setting the tariff, in terms of having the people first, etc. You have to abide by all that at your local level. How do you do it? But simply and precisely with this way to go up and down, down and up, and at each step, like Amandip said, at each step, there should be a control. So then if you do that, it can be done quite easily with the support of a central PPP unit. We advocated local PPP unit also, but then each step, launching, then controlling that it is a project worth for being done in PPP, then procurement, all that in zero tolerance to corruption, all that nowadays can be rather easily developed. And I don't think personally, having done many projects in Africa, that there is so much differences between one country to the other when you start by those very simple principles. Why myself, as a mayor, I should try to develop a project in PPP rather than in traditional procurement with that I'm doing every day.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. I'm going to go back to the elephant in the room that Stephen acknowledged, and that's funding. And in the U.S., they have a mechanism that grants very large amounts of tax credits that can be sold, and that produces a subsidy for the public-private partnership. It's called the New Markets Tax Credit, and it's the largest economic development initiative ever in the United States. And that is a way that the public sector can come in through at the federal level and help enable public-private partnerships at the local level. What do you guys see as the policy, first policy law, and then whatever other mechanisms are available, maybe multilateral financing institutions, maybe others, that could help overcome this cost barrier, the financing barrier that we all know exists with small PPPs? I'll pick on, I have to pick on Jyoti because Jyoti has the background for this for sure.
Thank you, David. I think all of us, have interesting backgrounds on this subject. I think, and we had a whole session on financing, and I think this is really the crux of this situation. And actually, Zia, Dhrupa, and I are actually just finalizing the blog on small PPPs. The World Bank's private participation in infrastructure database in 2016, 40% of the projects are under 50 million. And in 2022, only 3% of projects were under 50 million. And that tells you, I mean, of course, we haven't done full data mining and analysis, but that tells you the scale of what we are talking about, that significant decline in number of projects. Smaller projects under 50 million, they have a hard time attracting foreign currency denominated financing, whether it's even worth it for countries. And I think the other flip side of this is that maybe the countries like Nigeria, I mean, and Felix is with us, and it tells us that the countries have actually evolved, and they have a lot of countries have developed the capacity domestically to really look at these smaller scale projects with local financing, with local banks, and with local contractors. And I think when we say small scale PPPs, it's very important that local contractors, local financing, and local processes are really developed at the same time to make sure that these projects are not only they reach financial close and commercial close, but they are actually implemented at the local level, which generates local level impact. So I think that financial sector and the private sector development from bottom up is extremely important. Even if we have the national level regulation, this kind of approach, I think, is extremely helpful.
Excellent point, Jyoti. Who else wants to chime in on this?
Yeah, I can contribute to that. Following up on what Jyoti has said, the reality also on ground is that, especially for the subnationals, you need to also look at their fiscal capacity and capability, right? And all the options that are necessarily available financially to be able to even attract investment in the first place, right? So obviously anything that when I'm looking at the small scale PPP concept from an African perspective, then obviously the foreign currency risk would be something you would want to eliminate immediately as much as possible, because you also have to consider the current debt profiles of some of these subnationals and other fiscal constraints that are existing, right, in terms of now trying to attract or put together these projects. So from a small scale PPP perspective, a lot of the local context is to also have the local participation within the region, meaning local participants that can be fully delivering these projects using local currency, most importantly, right? Because that just helps in refocusing what we call small scale, because what we should be also considering, and that's what we are doing as an agency, whether we like it or not, to be able to be relevant, is that how do we remove the complexities that are currently existing in the frameworks that we have, right? What are the comparative advantages that we have within our jurisdiction that are compelling to be attractive, not just from a local perspective, but from a national investment perspective, right? That can be bankable first for even our local banks within our jurisdiction that will remove any other. So we'll look at the risk profiling, and that's part of what I think in redefining the small scale PPP space, that I guess sectors too can be aligned. Obviously, there are sectors that this wouldn't be practicable to apply, in terms of infrastructure and the likes. But I think you see how the evolution of the conversation in PPP space has kind of moved from hard infrastructure, more emphasis now on social infrastructure. I'm sure, there are also other economic drivers now, because for subnationals, most importantly, I think that is what is most important. How do we create jobs? How do we, generate more revenue as a subnational? How do we, so we need to look at economic assets. We need to look at economic drivers that can be, in the real sense, a partnership between private sector that is local, that would kind of catalyze, the local community in terms of just an uplift, in terms of the, current economic, because the governments also are looking for revenue streams, because their fiscal constraints are not even enabling them operate efficiently as a government, talk less of now investing into infrastructure further. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle that we're looking at practical solutions that can really, ease out, and put the right regulations for the next, 20 years to come.
And that's a very important point, Felix, and it brings up a furtherance of this original question, is because Christine, she really led off by saying we have to simplify to be able to do this at the local level. So how can policy and law play a productive role in simplifying the transactions without giving up the standards that we all want to adhere to for next generation PPPs at the local level? Mark, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to insist on one point. The beauty of PPP is that the municipality or other decide to go PPP because they are not sure that they can do a project. Okay, so then they say, I would like to do that for my people. I would like to do this. I need this public service. And for that, those are the guidelines. And from there, it launched that in a competition with the private sector. And this is where financing comes into play. The private sector say, yes, I will be coming. I am able to finance a project if your functional specification leads to this quantity of water, lead to this tariff, etc. So before looking at financing with problem, look at how you carve a project in such a way that the private sector say, okay, this one I can finance. It's not your best, it's not your Rolls-Royce project. It is a project which is adapted to your people. I can give you an example in Madagascar. I made several projects in Madagascar. People say, it's crazy, you will not be able to make a PPP project locally at Madagascar. It was very well. Simply the specifications were just adapted to the reality of the capacity of the people. It was not the public sector who knew that. This had no money. He had to request for financing. It is the private sector who came with say, okay, if you do that, I can finance, and you will have a service, not the ideal service that you will have in Western countries, but a service which is still much better. So I think that is really a first point to understand. The beauty of PPP is that the municipality or the local should not put specification, technical specification. Others, you start having big financing problem. And then when you still deal with financing, what happened locally in most countries? In most countries, local municipality, counties or region, they have the capacity to raise at their level some kind of specific taxes or levies. And then that also is something, in most cases, we have been exploring within the International Center of Excellence. We found that. So the question is, then how would they levy those, explaining to their people that thanks to this, then those people will have a much better life for their day-to-day service. So there are many ways to look at the best way to develop small scale. Not saying when financing is an issue. No, there are many other ways which could permit to develop those.
That's what I love about you, Mark. You're an eternal optimist. Who else would like to comment on that issue? Anyone?
If I may say something again, if we see practical, sorry, just a quick one. If we see practically, like a recent report that was released by ALSF on, just the regulatory environment across Africa, you see the context to which I'm trying to kind of bring is that, you know, when we looked at the unsolicited proposal kind of, you know, statistics, right? We saw that there was 60%, right? And that showed, and that was across Africa in terms of, you know, why is unsolicited proposals compared to from the public side, right? Why is it such a huge issue? And for subnationals in that light, or local governments, is that, like I said earlier on, there's a lot of potential for where there are assets that are redundant, right? There are a lot of, you know, investments where it's it's natural for, you know, the communities around them or the investment climate of private sector looking for opportunities to either expand, to grow, to redevelop and create those values that would approach. And that's part of why in even exploring small scale PPPs, I think the USP alignment, right, needs to also consider that in defining how unsolicited proposals can be a vehicle, you know, that is kind of clustered under small scale categorization or something like that. But for us in Africa, there definitely has to be where, you know, that option is available because, like I said, we're trying to remove complexities. We're trying to obviously still follow the principles and the general guides that should define a PPP, but bring less complexities when the projects themselves are not as complex, right? Because like I said, and it's in those kind of categorizations that we need to look at the climes that we talk about. And because what would be small in Europe might not necessarily be small in an African community, right? And that's part of why the balancing act, as we define these you know, small scale PPPs and projects and, you know, align them to sectors will be very key, you know, in terms of seeing how the execution can be seamless. And I think that's a space that WAP has a very, very significant role from a neutral standpoint, having that oversight to be able to guide, you know, in the conversation so that the key risk that PPPs normally present are still mitigated in the process.
Anyone else want to comment on that, Georgie?
I think, oh, so Jyoti, do you want to go?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Christine and Georgie both raise their hands.
Yeah. No,
Go
just,
ahead, Christine.
just
You have it. Go ahead, Georgie. Georgie can come after you. Go ahead.
very, very quick one. Just wanted to add here that I think also reducing the number of, I mean, if we look at the project preparation process itself, if there's a way to kind of, you know, while not compromising on the fundamentals, but can we do away with certain parts of those process to really shorten the time, you know, and in that way also simplifying it for these smaller scale projects, these micro projects. I think that's also something that needs to be explored. I mean, of course, we still look at things like looking at the viability, the feasibility, the value for money, but yeah, really try to see how we can shorten those project preparation processes.
Well, once again, you set up my next question, but go ahead, Georgie.
So maybe I'm anticipating your next question, David. Actually, in response to Christine said two questions ago, you know, that the local authorities realistically want a 10-page contract, not a 100-page contract, right. And goes to the point of which Felix and Mark and Amandeep and Stephen have said. I'm just wondering, and to the question which Ziad has put up in the chat, I'm just wondering, you know, let's say there's a community and there, you know, there is a street lighting project, there is a water project, water supply, and then there is a solar rooftop solar project. I'm wondering if, I think realistically we are talking about transaction costs, project preparation costs, like Christine just said, and perhaps these studies can be done at the community level, where they're assessing the social and economic impact from developing better street lighting, better heating and cooling and water supply and schooling at the community level. And that way, you know, bringing just essential elements, only the essential elements for which that particular private operator is going to be responsible for. And that way the contract is shorter. And then you have like a framework in a way. I mean, and this is me just brainstorming here, and you know, having a framework agreement and say that, you know, we are, and that way you've aggregated the projects as well and given the signal to the market that we are coming out with projects in different infrastructure and social sectors. And at the same time, you are going to be each responsible for this particular aspect. So that way you've shortened the contract and obligations, and also made the public sector more responsible, that they have to deliver economic development. They don't have to deliver just street lighting or water supply to those 1,000 houses. So in a way, this process has to really work together.
I think that's a critical point, Jyoti. And in evaluating these projects, you have to look at the economic impacts. You have to look at what that's going to do for the economy. Ziad said I'd been in economic development for 47 years. I've been in 47 states. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But I've definitely seen I've seen this work and not work at the local level, and you have to take that into account. So the question that was spurred by some of your discussion points, especially Christine, was, you know, and I know you're going to hate me for even bringing this up, but I'm going to bring it up. Where do you see artificial intelligence playing a role in this simplification? Can artificial intelligence play a role in reducing the transaction cost over time? Mark.
Sorry, but you see, this one is the one on which I've been working so much, aggregating all experience from all over the world. And this one is precisely one where now I think we have good principles. First of all, at the level of the county, of the municipality, of the local, it is simpler. One, far less transaction costs. You only have to say, essentially, that is what I want for my people, for the future generations. I cannot do it myself. At the same time, I want you, private sector, give me input. So then, at the level of the municipality, of the public authority, of the future contracting authority, transaction costs can be quite low. Now, look at the other side. Transaction costs then are transferred to the private sector in this situation, because the private sector has to design something, optimize, make it economically viable, make it financially viable. And then we say, oh, guys, it's not sufficiently precise what you are proposing to me. Please, public sector, give me some more guidance. For instance, what interests me? How you will be dealing with an exceptional event, with force majeure, with change of law, with change of conditions, etc. If you give me all those things which for me, private sector, are difficult to appraise, my appraisal to you will be much, much, much simpler. Give me head of terms, give me this. And then the cost, the transaction costs at the private sector become far, far lower. And last thing, you want to be sure that it will be a fair procurement. What can you guarantee me? That there will be a fair procurement, fair competitive, because I know that if you have, for instance, 10 bidders, 1 out of 10 with so many costs, I will not bid. So the private sector will only bid in addition if there is fair, transparent procurement, fully justified and controlled. And if you do all that together, we find around the world that the transaction costs for these small-scale PPP are far lower than the one for large PPP. Why? Because you have many projects which are replicable. You are not doing like large projects from the blue. In other words, you are not within the sector where you think that you could freely negotiate a contract. You do not, never negotiate freely a contract in terms of this kind of project in procurement. Otherwise, you have misprocurement. So all that becomes quite simple if we go to the fundamental and look what has been done in one country from the other.
Thank you, Mark. Let's move on. I was reminded that we're having a special session. One of our next sessions is going to be on technology and the role of technology, including AI. So we can move on. We have several great questions in the chat, but before we get to that, any of you have any thoughts given the discussion thus far? Again, looking at the role of policy and law and small PPPs, how can those really come together and meet at a place that enables more small PPPs? The statistic that Jyoti and Ziad found is startling. So we know that there's a huge challenge here to do this. But this is a general question, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
All right, David, I would like to point out a few cautions here, right? Yes, in every discussion about small scale PPP, it is that, okay, simplification is the, need to be there. Local government don't know PPP or the subnational don't know PPP, make it simpler, right? 10-page, 20-page document. We need to keep in mind, private sector is smart, always smarter than the government, right? We need to keep it simpler in terms of processes, okay? Through the regulatory framework, process can be simpler. Don't go up to the president level or the cabinet level, keep it down, right? Local government, maybe create an institutional mechanism where the local small projects can be approved, right? Create a fund. Now, you asked a question of funding and financing. I see it a two-level problem, two-level solution. First is project preparation. We always say, oh, transaction cost is higher than the project cost for a smaller PPP. I say one thing, PPP by definition is complex. And we know local government or the subnational don't have capacity. The answer lies in manifold. Capacity building. You need to have an advisor, right? Even if the smaller, simple, for example, radiology diagnostic projects, which can have hell lot of benefits at the social level, right? But you need to have an advisor to structure it, to make it even KPIs, the technical specifications. Private sector is smart. So simpler, make it simpler, but template, yes, templates can be done, but then I have seen where the countries where templates are formed, and then it was just Control-C, Control-V, copy-paste, and projects failed. Typical example, India, right? So we have every sectoral model concession agreement. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry comes, copy-paste, change the project name, and done. Project failed, right? So and on the funding, on the financing, yes, long-term financing at local government subnational level is an issue, is a big question mark. Before reaching that, we need to prepare a project well, right? For need that, create a fund. Create a specific institution, create a specific fund through the regulatory framework, right? Make it decentralized for the small scale PPP, whether local government or subnational. Create a fund from where the payments, if it, for example, availability payment, most of these smaller projects can be, availability payment. That payment, that fund have a cover ratio, right? A local government is doing 10 PPPs, for example, small PPPs, and they have obligation of X dollars every year. Create a fund, national government do support it. Okay, it could be, various sources, philanthropists and other crowdfunding, everything can come in, but it has a cover ratio to give market confidence. Once market confidence comes, you get a credit enhancement, right? You do de-risking approaches in simplification of the contracts. That's where I found that, okay, fine, it's costly, it's expensive, but you need to understand that it is always complex. We need to be very, very careful in looking at these preparation and then funding and financing. Come up with a policy of government support measurements mechanism, right? List a policy, come up with a policy that for the PPP smaller level projects, these are the rebates, tax holidays, etc., guarantees. National government is giving guarantee, etc., letter of support, all those kind of, come up with a policy, right? Give your trust, bring a trust in the market. So that's how, step by step, there's not a single solution. We need to do many things to get these small scale PPPs, affordable as well as successful. Thank you.
Excellent point. Anyone want to respond to that before we go to questions? We only have a couple of minutes, but if you want to respond to that.
Maybe one. I think fund is a fantastic idea, but I also think we need to involve the local stakeholders and the local people, and maybe also involving them in the funding could help in creating those small scale PPPs and could take away some of the risks.
Excellent point. Well, we have several questions. Go ahead, Georgie.
I just wanted to add here that, I mean, it's very interesting what Amandeep said and fully agreed. I think there are a number of studies out there that really show, how instrumental these project development funds have been in really expediting bringing projects from pipeline to actual implementation. But I think there are also examples of other sort of incentive structures that can enable or that can really expedite the process of getting these projects on the ground, getting the private sector to participate. And I think an example is from Peru. I don't know if anyone here is familiar, but they have the Work for Taxes program, where the private sector can actually proactively sort of develop projects in lieu of their income tax payments, so it's an interesting financing model, and it's worked phenomenally well for very, very localized projects in Peru across a range of sectors, some very difficult sectors like the water and sanitation space as well. A lot of projects that have been successfully implemented in this way. So in addition to looking at project development funds, I think there are a lot of other interesting models over there to sort of help the government defer payments for these infrastructure projects.
Excellent point. In the U.S., they're introducing legislation to create a guarantee fund specifically for public-private partnerships to strengthen resilience and infrastructure. And it will provide that lowering of risk to the point that hopefully these will be feasible. So all great points, and thank you so much, panel. You've been fantastic. We do have a few questions. We have one in the Q&A, and I think we have some that came out in the chat. But and forgive me, I'm going to butcher someone's name after all. Gulami Patriot says private sector participation should not only mean private financing. Government must accept to get private expertise in management of public services, in particular water and electricity. Forms of contracts already exist for dedicated management contracts at the level of a water company. Once the performance of the water companies have improved, then the private partner will be willing and able to invest, thus going toward bigger forms of PPP contracts, lease affirmage, etc. How can governments be convinced to involve private sector in the Q&M, the management contracts? What are the thoughts of the panel? I'll open it up. Who wants to respond to that?
All right.
Go ahead, MD.
Yeah. So I fully agree with that. Okay. Even smaller scale projects or the jurisdictions where long-term financing is an issue, it can be split. The project can be split, right? So kind of a DBOM model, remove the financing, right? Get the financing through government support or, and maybe DFI, small scale projects. We can need to, ask DFIs or the government, fund it, construct it, get the O&M. I am not in favor, I'm not advocate of only O&M PPPs because then the blame game starts. Private sector say, oh, you have constructed this, why should I meet this KPI, right? So ask the private sector to do design, build, operate, and maintain. The financing is coming from the government. Maybe national government is giving guarantee or some fund being created for this thing, right? So that's where the model is, because we want what PPPs, as we know, PPP is nothing, another form of procurement. What we wanted for PPP to get better services for our citizens, right? That's why we are doing PPP, right? PPP is not, which is a misconception in many developing economies, to get revenues for the government or the local government. No, PPP is for getting better services for our people, our citizens, right? So get that done. If there is a smaller scale project, no long-term financing is do DBOM model. That's my advice most of the time in such cases. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Go ahead, Georgie.
So I think this model actually, I've been involved in this particular model from the World Bank, where the progression in PPP risk sharing has really worked, because the capacity of the government in really understanding the private sector, the capacity of the private sector to understand the public sector, and really the understanding of the community, and especially in these smaller cities where, and this was particularly in water supply, it's, the infrastructure has been built 100, 200 years ago, and there is no record of where the assets are, what condition these assets are, what is the quality of the water. I mean, the quality of the thing about water is, and most of you know, is you can only maintain it at the point of inlet and outlet. What happens in the pipes underneath is really a mystery, especially in cities which have very historic past. So this model, actually, which you just described, has been applied. Initially the government really enters into a contract with the private sector, and that's a big leap of faith for a public authority. That is huge. And in that first step, to really say, okay, private sector, can you come and at least operate the supply of water to my residents? And then you slowly start transferring more and more risks. And originally the first contract was called enhanced management contract, where not only they were in charge of delivering water, but they were also in charge of actually mapping what assets are there underground, and that's a huge positive for the public authority. So progressively, but the important element in this is the champion in the public sector, in the water supply authority at the local level, had this long-term view that we need to stick with it, and we need to go this proceed on this step by step, otherwise it will not happen.
Thank you, Georgie. That's great. Mark, and then we have a question after Mark. Go ahead. You're muted, Mark.
Sorry, we are discussing a point which is extremely interesting, because the question of water paid by the public sector, or the water financed and paid by the concessionaire, has been a question which has been debated for over 100 years. And there are many, many answers. And currently, I think we are quite well on track with a lot of experience when the private sector is providing a better service on the long term in water for the people. Under which conditions is it possible? Now, if it is always the public sector who pays all the way around, private sector will be fine. Okay, I change things, you have to pay more. I do think so. What happened is that more and more, the idea is to share with the concessionaire many things on a real partnership, where the concessionaire organizes itself in order to best adapt all the time to the need of your users. Of course, you need to put that very clear in the contract, and recover entirely or mostly from users' fee. There's always a gap, always the financing gap, but that's not a problem. That can be addressed. But that is a core factors. And what is more important is the right for the public authority to stop, to rescind the contract at any time if the people are not satisfied. So then you have this situation where you start by having a public payment for the water or to the concession to the company, and then you have a situation where you shift from that model to the other. And for instance, in France nowadays, you may have about 10,000 the situation of where the municipality is contracting out the water. And you find, look at this, about half of them, each 8 to 10 years, are changing from public payments to users' fees. So I think we have, and the beauty of that, we know that the municipality are short of money. So the idea is to maximize situation where it is users' fee. That is, in our world of short finance, that is by far, at least in many countries, and same in Africa, same in many countries in Africa, that is the route to select first rather than public payment, which at the end of the day add to the public deficit.
Great point, Mark. Thank you so much. We have a question from, I'm happy to say, our new partner, Syed El-Zadi, who is the chair of the Working Party on Public-Private Partnerships for UNECE. And Syed asks, under generally accepted accounting principles, PPPs are accounted as debt in government books. Do you think it can be different for small-scale PPPs? Is there a policy issue that could be resolved there through good policy and law? I'm going to open that up. I have no idea, but I'll rely on you guys. You're the experts. What do you think?
I can elaborate on that. In the EU at present, PPPs that are structured as DBFM, design, build, finance, and maintain, or as concessions, they are off balance. But of course, then this requires the transfer of a lot of risks. And if you want to implement this kind of transfer at a very local level, this becomes very, very challenging. So you might not end up with a very well-structured PPP. So I think getting the debt and the asset of balance should not be the main driver of in setting up PPPs. It should be about the expertise, additional funding, and creating sustainability and long-term value for the people. So we should be very, very careful, because in Belgium we have a lot of experience with setting up off-balance structures, and they tend to go wrong.
Excellent point.
I can come in, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think this is another one of those topics, just like the AI. This is a huge topic, fiscal risk management of PPPs. And given that we only have 6 minutes left, I'm happy to elaborate, but I think it really demands a separate discussion. This is a big issue on PPPs. Many projects have failed, including local and national, but I think we keep it to a separate discussion on this, and happy to have about that. Of course, Saeed, we are going to be talking more and more on this, so we'll take it further. Thank you.
Okay, we're down to 5 minutes. So Ziad came back on. So Mr. President, Chairman, I'll let you close. You're on mute. There you go.
Thank you, David. Well, we just for everybody to know, normally we're having these discussion sessions every 2 weeks. The next one normally would be on March 29th, but it so happens that it falls on Good Friday. So we are not going to have a session on March 29th. We're postponing it 1 week to April 5th. So if you're one of the, subscribers to this program, please realize that the next one will be on April 5th. We are hoping to bring you some actual case studies of small-scale PPPs then. In closing, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you very much, David, for moderating, Christine, Stephen, Felix, Jyoti, Amandeep. Many thanks to you. The participants, the audience had many more questions, I'm sure, but we'll leave them for a future session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ziad. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a great session.